Welcome back, and of course those are your political roundup stories, and I did say two conversations for tonight. First is the insecurity in Plateau and Taraba State, where we recorded another yet some killings by people suspected to be bandits, and then we switch gears later to Edo politics. We're going to joined by the people right in the middle of all of this to bring that conversation to you. Let me introduce my guest who will be joining me to talk about the development in Plateau and Taraba. It's been in the front burner since the Christmas Eve, where people woke up dead, and now the number of those that have been killed from that incident stands at 195, and the country is not at war. That's very disheartening. And while they are still grappling with that, another attack again last night. So what's really going on? My guests may be able to provide answers to them. At some point, we'll be joined by the first PRO. We understand we're expecting him to join us because they were in Jos today. But for now, we have with me in our Lagos studio a legal practitioner and a public affairs analyst, Mr. Inibe Effiong. Thank you so much, sir, for coming on the program.
Thank you for having me.
Also joining us via Zoom is security expert and CEO of Beacon Consult, Mr. Kabiru Adamu. Mr. Kabiru Adamu, thank you so much, sir, for coming on the program.
My pleasure. Compliments of the season.
Compliments of the season to you. Dr. Kabiru, you know that when these things happen, you're one of our first port of call. My natural question is, we should be closing the year with some level of excitement. But now, instead of us closing the year with excitement across the country, we're not keeping tabs of death toll of people that by now should have been having hangover of Christmas. They are dead, silent in their grave. That number has risen to 195. Whilst they are still grappling with all that situation, another attack again. So my question to you, sir, what is going on?
In simple terms, it's a situation where non-state actors are challenging the supremacy of the use of force by the state. And sadly, they are doing so successfully. The complaint, the condemnation that appears to be in the media space, we're not seeing that condemnation in other cycles. As an example, I'm not aware that there is any declaration of perhaps an emergency situation in that location. There hasn't been, for instance, I know the president has requested and demanded for action by the security agencies, but the fact that even as at yesterday, there was a report of an attack, that means that presidential directive, unfortunately, has not been carried out. And the saddest part of it is we haven't seen anyone held accountable in spite of the fact that that presidential declaration was not carried out. So in simple terms, it's a situation where these non-state actors have beaten, they have felt the blood, and they are continuing to bite. And sadly, we are not meting out any penalty on them or deterrence that would stop them from continuing what they are doing. It's sad to say that this is the situation across several states in the country. You've mentioned Taraba, but it's happening in Sokoto, it's happening in Katsina, it's happening in Zamfara. In fact, there is no region out of the 6 regions of the country that these non-state actors in one form or the other are not carrying out attacks with almost wanton abandon. And so it worries me, and I say this with all sense of responsibility, that our security arrangement at the moment has not been able to prevent this level of attacks. And this other part of it is, we're clear that it hasn't prevented the level of attack. But more importantly, after the attack, we are yet to see a single arrest. And so the fact that it's not preventive, and then the fact that even after the attack, it's not arresting the perpetrators, I'm worried.
Let me come to you, Mr. Effiong, because sometimes we almost sound like a broken record. Every time this happens, we see statements, but it's like, I don't know whether we're not seeing as much progress as possible. So my first question to you, what is your impression of what is going on now?
Well, my impression is that, and let me start by expressing my sympathies and condolences with the victims of these horrendous attacks. What has transpired, I think it's a reminder that we're essentially a failing state. I'm careful not to say a failed state, but we're essentially a failing state. If you look at what the law says, we begin with Section 33 of the Constitution, and that is under Chapter 4, which contains the fundamental rights of Nigerians. The first right provided and guaranteed under the Constitution is the right to life, under Section 33. Now, when people are slaughtered, when people are killed in the manner that we have witnessed in Taraba, in Plateau, and several other, many other parts of the country, it is an indication that the right to life of Nigerians have been violated and that the government is incapable of guaranteeing that right. Now, we cannot have this conversation without situating the blame where it truly belongs. When you look at what the Constitution says, beginning with Section 130, it says that there shall be for Nigeria a president who shall be the chief executive officer of the government of the Federation and the commander-in-chief of the armed forces of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. That person today is President Bola Ahmed Tinubu, and he has to take responsibility for what has happened. Now, when you even look at the operational use and command structure of the security architecture of our country, beginning from the police, you look at Section 215 of the Constitution. That power is domiciled in the president. You look at the armed forces, Section 218. The president has the sole authority over the control of the armed forces. You look at the State Security Service, SSS. You look at under the National Security Agencies Act, it is still the president that has the sole authority and control over the SSS that is supposed to provide intelligence for the internal protection of our country. So what I see is basically abdication of presidential responsibility and constitutional functions. And that is how I choose to characterize what has happened. In other words, my verdict as a Nigerian is that today, President Tinubu has, to that extent, abdicated his responsibility to protect Nigerians. Because what does it mean to say that the president has given a presidential directive, a presidential instruction? The IG has given directive. I mean, I was just reading the news while coming here, that the IG has gone to Plateau State. And he said he's, deploying tactical teams, intelligence team, whatever, to Plateau. What does that mean? We are now living in a country, and quite tragically, where the words of the president, the statements of the president and commander-in-chief are clearly and undoubtedly meaningless to Nigerians. Because if the president of a country is saying that this has to stop, and barely hours after he has said that, we see another attack. What the attackers are saying is that in their mind, in their state of mind, they do not recognize the authority of the president. So we have to stop excusing this. Can anybody tell us today that the entire architecture, the entire military infrastructure, the entire state security service headed by Bichi, the entire Nigeria police force headed by IGP Ebetuku is incapable of detecting these attacks, is incapable of responding expeditiously, that the military has no aircraft, the police has no helicopters, they could not have responded within minutes of the attack, when the military has confirmed that they received over 30 distress calls. So there is simply no excuse for what has happened. It is either the government is complicit in these killings, or the government is clearly incompetent. But whichever it is, if it is a case of incompetence, how come that nobody has been held accountable? How come that the IGP is still in office? How come that BT, the SSS Director General, is still in office? How come that the Chief of Army Staff is still in office? This is the tragedy of the Buhari years. That in 8 years, we saw a president that people were killed, no accountability, no punishment. Is Tinubu now towing that same pattern? Because if these attacks take place, over almost 200 Nigerians killed, almost 200, and you do not sack the IG, you do not relieve the service chiefs of their responsibility, you are simply saying you do not care, and the attacks will be repeated. So there has to be some form of accountability. People has to be penalized. And I don't understand what the killing is about.
Okay, let me go to Mr. Kabir. I wanted to, I'm sure you may have some response to what he said in terms of what Nigerians may be looking for is some level of accountability from the people responsible. You will respond to that. Again, the governor was on our program earlier in the week, I think on the very next day after that attack. And sometimes when you listen to governors, sometimes they almost sound helpless. And he was calling on the federal government to what he calls political will. He even gave a hint, some kind of, say, land grabbers. His first question, is it that these governors are that helpless when it comes to protecting their own people because of the structure of the country?
No. A governor, to a large extent, has as much powers in his state as the president has at the federal level. So as an example, he's the chairman of the State Security Council. That council sits regularly. We know that post the incident in Plateau State, that council sat, decisions were made. In fact, before the incident, several decisions were made. Now, it's possible that the governor cannot issue directives, operational directives, to the various security agencies that are within the state. But the fact that he's the chairman of that council, the fact that reports are submitted to him, the fact that he sits down and chairs such meetings, tells me that he's got enormous powers. And I know that looking at some states, and I would mention a few of them, Lagos State has a model that is quite exemplary, and I think other states should also follow from. Lagos State has set up the Security Trust Fund. That fund is effective. It's being run like a private run body, quite transparent. What do we have in states like Plateau? And to add to that, before this governor, in fact, I'm happy that he's a lawyer. So what I'm going to say would be instrumental. Several committees and commissions of inquiry have been set up in Plateau State. I'm not aware that the recommendations of those committees have been implemented. And so the question is, were they waiting for the president to implement those recommendations? I don't think so. It's within the prerogative and the power of the governor to implement the recommendations, except where there are constitutional issues that would need to be addressed. But my point is every politician, and not just in the executive arm of government, at both the federal and state level, has a level of responsibility, and he or she should not shy away from that responsibility. The governor has the right to protect the citizens of his state. Now, how he does that, if he says he doesn't know how to do it, then I'm sorry, why is he occupying that state? We've seen similar positions by other governors. What did they do? They responded. Why are we not seeing the same thing in Plateau State?
I want to ask you one more question before I come back to Ms. Ifeong here. And there are drivers to these incidents, and sometimes people mention and say, oh, they are marauders, they are from outside the country, and all kinds of description given to these people. But from your own intelligence community, what have you learned as to the exact reason why these things are happening? Are these guys really foreigners? How much of foreigners are involved in this? How much of the locals are involved in this? Because if we don't do that analysis properly, we just keep all this blame game at the end of the day and nothing happens, and we don't know who to hold for what.
So let's take a step back and ask ourselves, what do we know beyond the narrative that is being bandied around at the moment? I use the words carefully, non-state armed groups. Now that's a generic word to describe several groups. And at the top of that, armed ethnic militias. Now, these armed ethnic militias are, belonging to different ethnic groups within the state. They are armed. Who is arming them? To an extent, sometimes ethnic groups arm them. Sometimes politicians arm them. One of the reasons for where we are at the moment is an outcome of the February and March elections. Negative mobilization was used quite, strongly along ethnic and religious lines. And we, at that point, we actually warned that one of the consequences that whoever is victorious in that election would have to live with is the consequences of that negative mobilization. So number one, ethnic militias. Number two, armed marauders that could possibly be associated with the Fulani Hada group. And I use the word consciously, possibly. Only a full-fledged investigation would reveal that. And then thirdly, you've got persons that are of criminal intention who are hired for the purposes of achieving political objectives. Now, the question of settler and indigene in Plateau State has not been settled. It's rearing its head from time to time, especially during political decisions. Now, if you haven't, you would recall that a few weeks ago, actually, there was the ruling of the appeal court, which did not favor a particular political party. Now, post that ruling, we've also seen a semblance of that negative mobilization. Now, how well are all of this playing into the current crisis in Plateau State? Now, within the foundation of everything that I've mentioned is a resource-based dispute between two communities that are essentially divided along ethnic and religious lines, that all of these elements that I've mentioned are exacerbating the competition between them. So I've had narratives suggesting that it is a land-grabbing exercise, but it's not as simple as that. It is complex. You have to lift all of these layers that I've mentioned, disaggregate them, and then before you come to the conclusion of what exactly happened. I've had a narrative suggesting that there were killings in some areas and that what we saw were reprisals. But all of that is not peculiar with this current cycle of violence in Plateau State. As far back as 2008 or even before then, we've seen cycles like that. Why haven't we found a way to stop it? Recommendations have been made. Like I said, there were commissions, committees of inquiry that have presented beautiful reports. And then international non-governmental organizations have also looked into it. They've presented beautiful reports. So we know what we need to do. And we know the politicians accountable for not doing the things that they are supposed to do to bring this violence to an end.
Let me come to you, Mr. Ifeong. So, what do you think is the implication of these repeated attacks, especially on the plateau, like we've seen? What do you see?
I think the way it is going, citizens are being pushed, the victims are being pushed to a point where people may begin to resort to self-help. Because, I mean, you listen to what the governor said, basically asking people to defend themselves. I don't understand why we should have a conversation in 2024. I mean, we're about to enter 2024. I don't understand why I should be having a conversation in the 21st century on whether cattle should be allowed to move around freely. Because this conversation, this suggestion that these are headers from Niger, from wherever, from Chad or whatever, that, oh, they need to feed their cattle, they need to be allowed to move their cattle. Why should the life of one Nigerian be killed because of a cattle? It doesn't make sense. It has never made sense to me. So those who say that this is land grabbing cannot be dismissed, because there have been cases, there have been testimonies over time that when these invaders, these terrorists, invade communities, they will displace the indigenous people of those communities. They will now inhabit their lands, and they will even rename those communities. These issues have never been decisively tackled. And when you heard General Danjuma saying that the armed forces is not neutral, you begin to now ask, is this really the case? Because if the armed forces is neutral, we will not be having these attacks. So what I am saying is that we are getting to a point where there is now complete loss of faith in the government. The territorial integrity of the Nigerian state has been challenged. And people can say, oh, Nigeria is indivisible, Nigeria is indissoluble, Nigeria cannot be divided. But in reality, in practical terms, we are seeing the territory of our country being conquered by terrorists. We are hearing excuses that, oh, because of the terrain, that, oh, these areas cannot be policed, these areas, the security agencies cannot easily access it. So the government has basically ceded parts of our territory, of our country, to terrorists. That is what has happened. Because what other explanation do you have for it? And how come that these attackers will invade these communities? At the end of the day, they return to where they came from. Nobody stops them. And were there no checkpoints? How were they able to live? Where did they return to? And to compound the matter, we even see reports where before attack take place, these terrorists will even be so emboldened to send notice, pre-attack notice that we are coming. This attack that just happened on the eve of Christmas, there was a notice that they were going to come, I think, on the 29th. And truly they went, even though they said people were not killed. So what does this tell you? It tells you that these people, these terrorists, have some level of protection of the state. If the state is not protecting them, or if the state is not so weak to the point of bringing them to justice, they will not continue. But if truly these are foreigners, what does that speak about us as a country? That you have foreigners invade our country, kill Nigerians, and return to where they came from. Nobody stops them. And then you have people being buried, given mass burial, and the president has not even gone to condole with them. I'm seeing pictures of him with his family smiling. I don't have anything against his family celebrating, but why make a public show of it? At a time that almost 200 of your citizens are being buried. The president of a country has not gone to visit the victims. It's only the vice president who went. I'm not even sure if he interacted with the victim directly. But people are tired of condolences. People are tired of excuses. Nigerians want to see solution. President Tinubu must decide today that this attack must not happen again. No. And if it happens again, this is what the consequence will be. In terms of resignation, in terms of firing people. And if the Tinubu comes to the conclusion that Nigerians, I promise you renewed hope, but unfortunately, I don't have any hope to give you. I cannot safeguard your life. The honorable thing is to resign. You cannot have citizens being slaughtered, and there is no consequence.
All right, let me come to you, Dr. Kabir. Is there a place in all of this for an empathy in terms of leadership? Because as is mentioned, because that was my next question, I know that to the best of my knowledge, I stand to be corrected, what happened in Tudunbiri in the Aero bombing, I don't think the president went there. I know the vice president also went there, and this incident had happened. So where is the place of leadership and empathy? If the president shows up in some of these places and these crime scenes, do you think it's going to make a lot of difference for the citizens who, who are looking up to him as their leader?
Okay, before then, I would quickly like to correct or rather advise my co-discussant. I mean, obviously he's from a legal background. Security is not as simple as he's painting it. I mentioned earlier on that this matter is complex. We should avoid the simplistic explanation that seems to be out there in the open media. He needs to study this more. I live in Plateau State. It's what I do. It's my expertise, and I can tell you it's a complex matter. It's not as simple as the narrative is. So he should take a step back and study the situation and understand what is happening on the Plateau. The deaths are condemnable, but we need to know who is behind those deaths. The simple explanation that we're hearing, I can bet you it's a little bit more complex than that. Now, with regards to your question, yes, sympathy from our leaders go a long way in restoring confidence, in building hope. And I've looked closely at the renewed hope agenda of the president. One of the policy statements there is that the government intends to win the hearts and minds of the people. And I can tell you that there is no counter-terrorism, anti-banditry, or public security operation that is won without the support of the local population. Now, incidents like the one we're discussing almost completely depletes that public trust. And so what it does, it affects the ability to gather intelligence, the ability to generate intelligence from that local community. And so when leadership expresses sympathy, both physically and then emotionally, and seeks to restore the hope of the people by, giving out palliatives, assuring them that the perpetrators would be penalized, then you see the people responding. Now, we've seen an improvement from the previous government to where we are at the moment. And I can say this with all sense of responsibility. But what is more important is that accountability element. I know the president hasn't, but he sent his vice president. The vice president did go to the location. He condoled with the people who have been recommended by the Plateau State government excessively. Okay.
So my apologies. We're totally out of time. That's why. But this is, as you said, this is an issue that is ongoing. We'll continue to ask the hard questions to ensure that people don't wake up dead. I will continue to say that, Inibe, just 10 seconds is what you have. I don't just want you to...
Let the governor of Plateau State and the other states affected apply for firearms from the IG. Allow vigilantes within those communities to be armed in a regulated way to protect themselves. Under the Firearms Act, Nigerians have the right to hold licensed firearms. I'm challenging the governor of Plateau State, if you are truly serious, write to the IG today, write to the president, and to give arms to communities that are affected. Let the leaders of those communities rally youths arm them with license of the government to protect themselves. That is the way out of this. And there is nothing complicated about protecting the life of citizens.
As long as it's within the law. As long as it's within the law. All right. Thank you so much, Ms. Inibe Elfiong, legal practitioner and public affairs analyst. Thank you so much for coming on the program. Also, Dr. Kabiru Adomu, security expert and CEO of Beacon Consult. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for coming on the program. We always will come through to you whenever we need insights from you concerning these issues. Thank you for coming on the program.
Thank you.